When will the anger go away? When will the grief stop? I'm so tired of feeling this way. If you're asking yourself these questions, this video is for you. And before we get into it, I'm going to read the comment and the question that inspired this video. Let's get into it, shall we? New on trying to heal. When does the anger go away? I didn't realize how much hurt and anger is kept in for 56 years. She passed away in August of 2024, and all I felt was anger. Thank you for the question, Wendy. I'm 58, just for, so that we know we're from the same time frame kind of thing. And I think in some ways it makes a difference, in other ways it doesn't, because the patterns of the narcissistic family system and the abuse and the wounds that are left behind are very, very similar and same. And part of the reason for that is the fact that it's a type of abuse that's extremely systematic, insidious, and layered. And it goes on throughout our childhoods. And because of the emotional violence that is a huge part of narcissistic abuse, it leaves us in a situation where, as children growing up, we don't learn how to regulate. We don't learn what emotions look like. If I ask clients, what emotional needs were met or unmet in your childhood, and because my clients are from narcissistic family systems, I get the same response every single time. What are emotional needs? What do you mean by that? I get responses like, well, I don't know. I find that very confusing, because we grow up, I don't want to say raised, we grow up in an environment of mass confusion. And we also grow up focusing our responses to other people's emotions, hypervigilance, and being very aware of what's going on the outside, not being allowed to have feelings on the inside, which means that we don't learn how to process them, own them, embrace them, and all of those things along the way, while other kids are hitting those very normal, healthy milestones. And so I just want to kind of give to you a little bit of contrast or perspective on what it means to even have our anger now and what it meant for me. And now I'm going to talk to you in very first person terms and share with you what worked for me and how it sort of, just rolled out. And hopefully something in what I say will click for you and help you too. So there's a couple of things. I appreciated, let me rephrase that. I appreciated my emotions I still do, to a huge degree. Like I cannot tell you the gratitude I have for my emotions, because I was one of those kids that spent a lot of time being very numb. And to be able to be angry, to be able to be sad. And when I went through the height of my therapy and my healing, I was having flashbacks and memories, and there was literally not a day of peace until I got on some meds to help me navigate the level and depth and duration of my constant emotions. There was no way that I was going to be able to regulate that. I'm not suggesting, taking anything, not taking anything. This is not that. I'm just sharing my part of the journey. So I remember the period of time where I wasn't appreciating my emotions so much, because I was exhausted and because I was stuck in, when is this going to end? And my therapist at the time, who I just lucked into a really good therapist, who had an understanding of narcissism and of antisocial personality disorder, which my mother is both. And so because she had such a great knowledge of where I came from, I think she was able to help me at a higher degree than maybe somebody who wouldn't have been able to. And what she kept saying to me was, you're not going to get to the finish line by focusing on it. You're going to get wherever you're going to get by feeling and letting those feelings be. And eventually I started to, because there were points in time after therapy where I'd have anger, I'd have a lot of sadness. One of my big sticking points was not knowing who I would have been, how I would have turned out, the life path I would have chosen, the realization of the dreams I had as a kid, like going to Juilliard, those kinds of things, not knowing who I would have been, but for a moment, before the trauma, because the trauma was consistent, right? So I felt a lot of grief around feeling like all of my dreams, because they were taken from me, and what was my potential. Thankfully now I do feel that I've reached my potential. It doesn't mean I'm not sad about having my dreams crushed. I would have liked to have been able to choose whatever path I was going to take from a healthy perspective, from not having received a traumahood instead of a childhood. That was where I was really stuck in my grief and my anger. I felt so much anger at my mother for what she took from me. And I felt anger at her for the fact that I wasn't going to receive justice for myself, for my first stepfather that I believe that she was involved in the demise of, and all of those sorts of things. When you know. And the anger was only in competition with the sadness sometimes. Eventually, I really made peace with the fact I was angry and the fact that I was sad. I was like, oh, I get to have these feelings. So that's what I mean, that I appreciate my emotions. And to this day, if I have a moment, because sometimes I'm triggered, something happens, I have a memory, whatever it is, and that little or big feeling comes up again, and I'm like, oh, fuck it, nobody can take these from me now. Because as a child, everybody was squashing down my feelings, because I had to watch my environment to maintain my own safety, and I had to morph into, be the good little girl, the fawn, into whatever it was I needed to be in that moment to stay as far underneath the radar as I possibly could. So I am super grateful for the fact that I'm allowed to feel. I feel what I feel, and I go with my feelings. I don't focus on the finish line. If I'm angry, I'm angry. It'll pass. All these feelings will pass. Anger is the gateway to healing. And sometimes we need to sit in that anger and process why we're angry, that we have the right to be angry. And most importantly, for me, and for I think everyone, but I'm speaking, my journey, little Marnie deserves to be angry. And she deserves to be safe in that anger and not pressured for when it's going to end. I'm just putting it that way to give you a little perspective on where a lot of this anger is probably coming from. And that little child is feeling safe enough to have these emotions, probably because your mother's gone. So take care of her. Love her through the pain and the anger, and it will dissipate faster. I can tell you that just based on my practice with my clients, what I see. What really sealed the deal on the end of the anger for me was a thought that popped into my head one day, just randomly, or maybe just not so randomly, but part of my processing. I looked back at my life, and clearly my mother turned, and the narcissistic family system, she wasn't the only one. They don't work alone. People have to be complicit. When they're quiet, when they're letting it happen, and when they're also buying into the smear campaign and saying things like, Marnie was always a liar from the time I'm 4. That's what one of my aunts would say. So they don't do it alone. What I finally started to realize though was that my entire childhood was a traumahood. I never had that carefree innocence, or I had the innocence, obviously I was an innocent child, but I never had those moments of just walking through life kind of thing, because the other shoe was always going to drop. Even being happy wasn't an allowed emotion, because being happy was terrifying. I knew as a child that if my mother had a sense that I was content or happy, whatever she had coming my way was going to be a bajillion times worse. So I looked back and I thought, that's a whole chunk of my life gone. And then I looked at my early years as like a mom, like I was 17 when I had my first child, in my early 20s before therapy, and all of the struggles I had during that time because I felt like I wasn't good enough. I felt like I was going to mess everything up. I had no good roadmap on how to be a mom. I was trying to do things in opposite day, always second guessing myself. Like there was just so much stress. And I realized that's another chunk that they got, particularly my mother, because I was so terrified of becoming her. So what happened with those thoughts? As I was stewing in my very necessary anger that I honor, I realized that my mother would love where I was in that moment in time, which meant that she was getting another chunk of my life. And I was like, I will be damned. I kid you not, it was just a series of little and big thoughts about where I was in my life and what I had going for me and what I could make go for me, what I could do, what goals I could set, and all of those different things. I was free from her, and I was giving her a chunk rent-free of my life because she was still in control of my emotions. That was it. I'm not saying I don't have moments where I'm angry or frustrated or sad or I have loss and different, of course I do. If you watch any one of I have well over 1,000 videos, there's lots of times where I get emotional, where I'm still hurt about things that were taken or that I didn't have, or the healing I had to do. I might be angry and all of that. It's not that I don't have those emotions. It's that they're not running the show, and neither is my mother. I hope this video helps you, and I thank you so much for this question. And I kind of feel like condolences are not in order here, but well, I guess what I'm going to say to you, not I guess, what I'm going to say to you is I'm sorry for the traumahood that I know that you had. That's where I'm going to leave my condolences. And maybe even I'm sorry for, not maybe, actually, I'm waffly today. I'm actually really triggered today. This marks the anniversary of two of my dads who died. My biological father, actually today, and my stepfather, who was the only daddy I knew in childhood, was on the 16th. So I'm raw. Talk about processing emotions. And I notice it because any little noise, I'm like, Moro reflex times a bajillion, and I'm just very, very raw. Anyway, what I want to say to you is something from how I feel. And if you're feeling this way too, then it'll apply. And if you're not, somebody else will benefit from it. I'm sorry that you didn't have the kind of mother that you could grieve. Again, thank you for being here. I'm sending you a ton of love and light. And sit in those emotions. They're going to pass. Honor them. Honor that little girl inside of you, that little child inside of you. She deserves it. Sometimes the only thing we can do is be our own best mom. Sometimes the only thing that we can do is to be our own good mom.